Okay, yeah, so this will be an AIME tips seminar. Just my own opinions on what are some good tips for the AIME. You can take it or leave it. Obviously, if you have a lot of experience with AIME and can do similarly well as me, some of my tips might not apply to everyone. So yeah, I'm just gonna go over this document I typed up on some tips on AIME, and I'll answer questions after I go over it. So maybe after 30 or 45 minutes, I'll take questions. But yeah, it'd be good if you kept your questions until the end, unless you really have to ask and have to go soon. But for the sake of the recording, I'll go through the document first and then take questions. And you don't have to take all my advice too seriously. Advice is meant to be listened to, not necessarily followed. So you should just take some practice AIMEs and see what works well for you for taking the AIME. But maybe you'll get something out of this anyways. I think one thing that I should probably stress is it's good to have a good and positive mindset, like I put in bold here, because yeah, mindset is good. And try not to do too much math the night before, because it will probably not be as helpful as you might think. It'd probably just be good to relax the night before the actual AIME test, whenever you happen to take it. Okay, so yeah, so I think sometimes in this document, I will just assume that, for some of you, your goal is to qualify for JMO or USAMO. So if that's not you, you can scale my numbers accordingly, right? So if I say, oh, if you're trying to aim for a 10, you should do this. But if your goal is a 6 or an 8 or a 12 or something, just scale it by the appropriate fraction, and maybe the tips will still apply to you. So everyone should and may have different goals depending on where you are in your math journey. And yeah, so yeah, a lot of my advice might apply to those, trying to score better in the number 6 to number 10 questions on AIME. So yeah, there's that. Okay, so yeah, you can take my advice not too seriously. But I think everyone knows the structure of the test. You have 180 minutes for 15 questions. Maybe you only want to attempt 12 of the questions, right? So if you want to just ignore the 3 hardest looking questions, you can just, divide 180 by 12 and get about 15 minutes per problem. But it doesn't really matter, because the easier ones take less time and the harder ones take more time. Yeah, and obviously, for the purpose of AIMO or JMO index, each question is worth 10 points for each correct answer on the AIME, which means, your goal should first and foremost be, get points for every problem you solve. Don't just solve a problem and leave it as is and be sloppy with your arithmetic or reasoning and not get points for it because you made a mistake, right? If you think you've got the overall gist of how to solve it, make sure, you check the details and actually do it correctly at some point in the test, even if it's not on your first go through of the problem, although it probably should be your first go through of the problem. So I don't know if you can see my, well, okay, this is just a PDF, so that's fine. So if you look at allowed tools and aids, basically the only things you can bring are, well, hopefully your proctor gives you scratch paper, but you can bring writing utensils, rulers, compasses, and erasers. So they don't have graph paper anymore, and they don't have protractors anymore, I think, at least on the website. Although I don't know, they never made a specific announcement banning those, but it looks like those are not allowed based on the current website. So yeah, it looks like, if colored pencils help on geometry problems, you can bring those, although I never did that as a student. In general, I would just say, go in order of the questions. Don't worry too much about, and hang on, let me just link, hang on, what if your eye is a protractor? So the only thing I have in the Dropbox folder right now is one copy of this document. So you can just look at it on your own if you want. I'm not going to read it word for word because that'd be boring. Yeah. So, I don't think it matters too much what order you go in. I personally just try to go in order. Like I would do 1 through 5 in order. And then like 6 through 10, I would just like, kind of jump around or do whatever seems interesting first, or whatever seems easy first. Or if you want to save an easy question for later, you can, I guess, but it's probably not going to help or hurt much, whether you do that or not. Try not to like spend too long on any one question, because like even though it might be super interesting to you, if you spend 42 minutes on it, maybe it's not the best use of time since you only have 180 minutes. So instead of spending like 40 minutes on one problem, maybe after you spent like 15 to 20 minutes on it and still haven't solved it, like put it on hold and do another problem maybe in less time. And then if you still have time to come back to it, then you can like keep going down like a rabbit hole, or like drilling down one question if you really want to. But yeah, and like I was saying before, don't really take my advice too seriously. Hopefully if you're serious about this, you should just take a lot of practice AIMEs on your own, hopefully before today, and figure out what works best for you. Yeah. So, have a realistic goal. Don't, if you average a 7 on practice AIMEs, don't shoot for a 10. That would be unrealistic, but also don't shoot for a 5, right? You can shoot for a 7 just like you do in practice. The AIMEs have not increased in difficulties as much as the AMCs in the last 20 years. So, most of the last 20 years are probably, fair game for a helpful practice. And keep in mind that there is some test variability. So maybe if you're better at geometry than number theory, then a certain test might feel easier for you but harder for someone else. And if vice versa, it might feel hard for you, or whatever the opposite I just said is. But in general, if the test feels really hard, probably everyone else will think it's hard. And if the test feels easier than usual, then everyone else might feel it's easier than usual. So just keep that in mind. But don't worry about that on the test. Just do the best you can do, and don't worry about how everyone else does, because that's outside of your control, and it helps you know a bit to think about that. And for those who just came in, it'd be good to keep yourself muted and cameras off, since this may be put on YouTube at some point. So let's see. One thing that I should stress is, like, I think it's good to show your work neatly. Even if it slows down your writing a little bit, you want to be able to check your work, because AIME problems are longer than AMC problems. So, if you can't check your work easily, then there's something wrong with the way you're like approaching the test and writing down your work. So these are just some general tips, but try to get points for every problem you actually solve. Don't like try to avoid like off by 1 errors, arithmetic errors, and things like that. And you'll have to figure out how to best avoid errors like that for yourself. But if I'll just go through some of these. I say skip around, use your subconscious to your advantage. The second bullet point, which just means like, if you get stuck on a problem, don't get stuck on it for 10 minutes without making any progress. If you just get stuck for two or 3 minutes, move to another question. Sometimes your brain, it does magical things, and like your subconscious will like get an idea to the problem you were stuck on an hour later into the test. So yeah, use your subconscious to your advantage. Check your work. And make sure you've read the question twice before you start working on it, or something to that effect. Like, it doesn't have to be exact, but you obviously don't want to work on the wrong problem, and at the end of solving the question, you don't want to like answer the wrong question, meaning like you should check that you answered what they're asking for, and like everything is in the correct format when you extract the integer answer. And it's not a proof contest, but you should still try to be like rigorous in your logic. Is your solution foolproof? Any holes in your logic? Check that if you can, if you have the ability to do so. And yeah, I've already said you should check arithmetic, so you can just read through this on your own time. There are tricks for multiplying by 9 or powers of 2 or powers of 5. One thing I'll mention is that you might want to check your multiplications mod 9. So like in my example here, if you're doing 1,234 times 5,678, your answer had better be -1 times +1 mod 9, right? Because multiplication, it carries through in mod anything. And 1, 2, 3, 4 is 1 mod 9, 5, 6, 7, 8 is like -1 mod 9. So if your answer isn't 8 mod 9, then you've done some arithmetic wrong. And yeah, make sure to keep yourself muted for the new arrivals. You can be creative in how you do arithmetic. If you can do it 2 different ways, definitely do it 2 different ways. You might not have time to do all your arithmetic 2 different ways, but you can, right? If you do have time, it might not be bad. I say this because I tend to make a lot of arithmetic errors. So if you're more accurate than me, you can just ignore that advice. One good way to think about the test is like, you can break it up into thirds. So 1 through 5 are easier, or 6 through 10 are like medium or challenging, and 11 through 15 are like, even harder than that, usually. You don't have to take it too seriously. Maybe number 12 will feel easier than number 7 to you for some reason. But in general, they have the test in roughly increasing order of difficulty. But that's not to say like if you get stuck on number 5, don't feel bad just because it's number 5, right? Because maybe number 6 through 10 all feel easier than number 5, and you just can't seem to get one thing on number 5. That's totally fine. Don't stress about it, because well, it's not helpful to stress about it, and it could just be that the problem is misplaced, or like maybe you'll figure it out 2 hours later or something during the test if you get stuck on number 5, as a random example. So if you're aiming to qualify for a USAMO or a JMO, most of your time should probably be spent on number 6 through 10. So you can like jump back and forth between those 5 problems. Like maybe you solve 2 of them off the bat, and then the other 3 you struggle with a bit more. So maybe you work on one for like 10 minutes, and then you jump to another one of those through 6 to 10 you haven't solved for another 10 minutes. And every time you get stuck for 2 to 3 minutes, you can consider just thinking about a different problem for a little while, or for a longer while, or several different problems for a while, and to come back to the current one later. And yeah, so don't feel like you have to like solve each problem like right as you read. I mean, like definitely you can read problems before solving the previous problems. Like some people, they might just say, oh, I'm going to read all 15 questions before I do any problem at all. I don't really recommend this, but you can, right? Like there's no harm in it technically. I don't know if it's like mentally psychologically like encouraging or discouraging. Might be encouraging for some people or not helpful for others, but you can do that if like you feel like it might be helpful. For 11 through 15, the third section, you should read all the questions at least, because maybe 1 or 2 of them will feel doable to you and you should attempt them. By doable, I mean like doable within a reasonable amount of time and doable at all. So, if you're at that level, you should definitely read all 15 questions, no matter what level you are. But, try to, you can't really do this beforehand, but if you can, try to identify which ones of the last 5 might be doable, and don't be afraid to attempt them. Like some of them might just look notationally intimidating, but they're actually not too bad to solve. But I probably would not work on more than 2 out of the last 5 questions seriously, just because I am personally too slow to like attempt all 15 questions on the test. I prefer having 4.5 hours to do an AIME, but that's just me. So, and also, if you're not at the level of doing 6 through 10, just keep working on numbers 1 through 5 on practice AIMEs, or previous year's AIMEs rather. But for the most part, I'll just, gear this document towards like people who are, can solve maybe half the questions on AIME or more. And again, if I say, oh, if you want to aim for a 10, but your personal goal is like to aim for a 7, just multiply all my, goalposts by like 7/10 or something and round to the nearest integer. So sometimes people ask like, so the format of this document is that I just like have some Q&A that I thought of myself, and then I just give some tips. So sometimes people ask me, oh, should I like use ruler and compass to kind of draw diagrams at the very start? So I personally don't do that. I mean, I personally don't recommend that anymore. The way I would do a problem is like, just like draw like a sketch of our problem. And maybe you have to do 2 sketches, right? Because maybe like you want 2 different looking diagrams. Maybe you want one obtuse triangle and you want to draw the same diagram, and for whatever reason. And first do some freehand sketches, maybe 1 or 2 diagrams. If you feel like it'd be helpful to draw it accurately with ruler and compass, then do so after you freehand it. Because one thing I used to do as a student is I would just like try to draw with ruler and compass perfectly. And then I realized, oh, this is totally out of scale. Like my length 10 looking length should actually be length 80 or something. And then like all my efforts in using the ruler and compass were for naught. So it's better to freehand 1 or 2 or 3 diagrams before using ruler and compass to actually draw it like legitly, if you can construct it at all. If you can't construct it, maybe just do your best, estimate. It doesn't need to be perfect to solve the question. Hang on. So I'm going to take questions at the end for the sake of this recording. So keep your questions to the end. If you have them, you can feel free to retype them after I go through the document. So I'm not going to take questions now. Should I use colored pencils? Oh yeah, you don't have to use colored pencils. You can if you want on the harder geometry questions. Now that I teach with this PDF annotator, I find it helpful to like use like maybe like, oh, this is like the given information, and oh, maybe this is like the supposed like concyclic 4 points, and like I don't know. It could help you, but I don't think it's important too much either way. So the same goes for whether to use ruler and compass or not. Just use your own judgment. Like if you think it could be helpful, definitely do it. If you think it doesn't matter or it'll slow you down, then you don't have to do it. Don't spend too long drawing the diagrams though, because you should spend most of the time actually solving the geometry question. So how should you manage your time? Well, obviously the best thing to do is just take practice tests beforehand and figure that out yourself. Maybe like 1 through 5 takes you somewhere between 40 to 60 minutes. I'll just say 60 minutes. And then you spend the other 2 hours on 6 through 10. So 60 minutes, maybe, you do it and you check it. And that's what you do in the first hour. And then maybe 6 through 10, you just like do as much as you can in the last 2 hours. And that's fine. It doesn't need to be perfect. You should just like do what makes sense. You have to adapt to the test. So anything I say could be thrown out the window because, maybe the test, doesn't allow you to follow any of your personal advice you've made yourself or any advice that I'm suggesting today. Yeah, and don't take my advice too seriously. And you don't have to take your practice. Like you may have to, what I mean to say is you may have to like adapt how you take practice tests to the real test. Like, if the real test is different for some reason, maybe like your general time management strategy needs to be adapted slightly on the day of the test. And hopefully you will be able to figure that out on your own, because obviously, neither you or me will know what the test will be like until the test day. Okay, so what I wrote here was just do the best you can in the first 2 hours, and the latest time I would recommend to check your work is like around the 2 hour to 2 hour 15 or 2 hour 30 mark, probably 2 hour 15, because if you catch a mistake to something you've done in the first 2 hours, you don't want to have like only 2 minutes or 5 minutes to fix that mistake. Maybe you have to rework the whole problem and it takes another 12 to 18 minutes. So try to catch mistakes before the last 30 minutes of the ones you've done in the first 2 hours is what I kind of recommend, because you could run out of time otherwise to fix a mistake. But obviously, it's not going to be perfect, right? You can't like do everything perfectly, and you don't know which problems are going to be hard, easy, doable, whatever, before you've solved them. So yeah, this is just it's kind of there's a lot of unknowns that you won't know until after you solve some problems. So so I've talked about problem stickiness. That just means, should I stick to a problem for longer or should I jump around more? My general advice is to jump around more. But if you have like 3 different approaches to solve a geometry problem, like maybe you want to coordinate bash it, maybe you want to trig bash it, maybe you want to find similar triangles or whatever, try all your approaches before going on to the next problem. Like, don't just like half-heartedly do a problem because Zinke said, oh, don't stick too long on a single problem. Like, do stick on a problem if you think you can solve it. But if you get stuck, don't be afraid to jump to like another problem. Yeah, so one thing I'll say about writing down your work is like what I did. The year I qualified for USAML is like, I just did 1 page per problem. So this took me like 20 sheets of scratch paper, and I had to ask my teacher for more, but it's okay. Like, you only take the AIME once a year, and even though it's a waste of paper, those extra 10 sheets of paper aren't gonna like, it's worth it if you can qualify for JMO or AIME. So even if you're like, oh, I only did this much work for number 1, it's not always bad to just do your work to number 2 on a separate sheet of paper and organize like all your scratch work on your table like neatly somewhere if you can. Like on later problems, let's say you're working on number 10, maybe you don't solve it, or your first 2 approaches don't work. So you might need like 3 sheets of scratch paper front and back to like do all your work and like, stumble around in the darkness until you find like a path to a correct solution. So, as a case in point, you shouldn't try not to have your work too messy. Like, maybe you can get away with it on AMC or math counts, but I'm just gonna, let's see. Oh, so I'm just going to share one other thing. So this is Evan Chen's scratch work, the year he got a 14 on the AIME, and I think it illustrates a good point, which is that let me just share the right document. Share. I do not see it. Where is it? Okay, I'll just share my screen. Yes. Okay, does everyone like give us a thumbs up if you can see this? Because okay, there's a hand raised, there's a thumbs up. Okay, great. Yeah, so thanks. So if you look at like Evan's scratch work here, this is like, it's like just at a glance you can see, oh, this is like very easy to check your work, right? Like even if you were a stranger and you were looking at this work and you just did the test yourself and you want to grade like if his solution looks good on the AIME, you can, it's like super easy to like, see, kind of what's going on, and like, if there's an arithmetic mistake, it's easy to catch and all that stuff, right? Like, you don't want your work to be too messy, and it doesn't need to be this good. Like I can't make my work this good, but try to make it good enough that you can check it without too much effort is what I'm trying to say. Just because and I guess I can link this too, it doesn't really matter, but yeah, you don't have to take this too seriously, but I think it's good to be able to check your work as easily as you can right here. So I'll just stop share my PDF again like I was. Okay. So should you check your work at all? The answer is definitely yes, especially if you've like gotten into a roadblock on like 2 or 3 questions and don't feel like trying a new one, that might be a good time to check your work. Doesn't need to be perfect, but yeah, like one story I'll tell is like in 10th grade, I thought I got like a 10 or 11, but I ended up getting a 6 because I just had some mistakes, like 4 or 5 mistakes. I misbubbled one because I thought like the top bubble was like a 1 instead of a 0 or something. And I bubbled 561 instead of 560 or something. And yeah, so definitely bubble correctly, but also more importantly, usually you can bubble correctly. That shouldn't be a problem usually. Usually just check your work because you don't want to make 2 or 3 mistakes and be very sad about that afterwards. So should you guess, I don't think it matters too much because your chances of getting it right are kind of low. But if you spent 10 minutes on it or more, or 5 minutes on it, and you couldn't solve it, you might as well guess if you don't, if you want to randomly guess on the question. But I personally didn't think, because the way I would guess is like I debate, should I guess this or this, and it wastes time. So I just didn't bother guessing on the AIME. Should you bring anything else? Yeah, you should bring water, snacks, maybe a second bottle of water, and keep in mind it's just a math test at the end of the day. So like you can go to the bathroom, you can drink water, you can if it's not too self-conscious, you can stretch a little bit in your desk, or if you're at home, you can like do some whatever stretches and just relax because it's hard to concentrate for 180 minutes or 3 hours at a time. So it's fine to take a 30-second or 60-second break, especially if you're feeling stuck or tired, for like your brain is feeling tired. So that's what I was just saying here roughly. If you have more questions, you can ask me at the end of this talk, or you can ask your best buddy who also does math competitions if you like have questions after this talk. Yeah, so I'll talk about mindset later, but think about I guess most people here are pretty lucky. You're not like living in poverty or out of clean drinking water or food for the most part. So the fact that you have like the comfort to study for math competitions at all, it's like pretty lucky. So don't be nervous on the test, because it could be much worse. I guess like life could always be much worse than it actually is. So yeah, so there's no reason to be nervous, because maybe some people are not fortunate enough to know about or have time to do math competitions at all. So at least you are more fortunate than them. So yeah, read the question twice. Just kind of do what feels right to you. Like you can ignore all my advice and you can ignore all your previous experience advice if you want. That's perfectly fine. And if you feel like, oh man, 15 looks really easy and doable, I really want to try it, then but by all means try it in the first hour, right? You can do that. It can be the first problem you try. Like if it feels right to you, then do it. But like just be aware that you do have a 3-hour time limit, so you don't want to like spend too much time on 11 through 15, even if they look fun or doable or interesting or whatever. Because your first goal should be to pass or do as well as you can, which is making your goal whatever that happens to be. And obviously not everyone here has the exact same goal, so it's fine if your goal isn't to qualify for the Olympiad this year. Maybe you can shoot for that goal in a future year. Yeah, and also there might be a really hard question among numbers 6 through 10. So even if you can get like 9 or 10 questions right, don't feel bad if there's like 1 or 2 questions that like you just can't get for some reason in the 6 through 10 range. Maybe you can get one of 11 through 15 or something. Same for 1 through 5. If you really get stuck, just don't worry about it and come back to it later. Let me drink some water. So for those who arrived late, I am recording this and I'll give a link to the recording at the end. And yeah, I may put it on YouTube, which is why I recommend you keep your cameras off and your voice muted. for the most part. So one thing about getting unstuck that may be helpful, maybe not, is like, identify to yourself what makes this problem hard. Like, what is it that's keeping me from solving this problem? Is it like this random geometry condition that I have no idea how to use? Is it like, this one fact in this one sentence that I don't know how to use, or like it seems hard to use it? Tell yourself verbally exactly what it is that makes it hard, and think about how you can like get around that. Like, if there are two other interesting facts about the problem given in the problem statement, how can you use the interesting things to like get rid of or remove or tackle what's hard? Like, so that these are just some very vague general questions that may or may not actually help you get an idea to solve a problem you're stuck on. So I talked about, should you attempt the last five? I would say, don't be too intimidated by the problem placement on the test. By all means, read it and try it if you feel like it's doable. So I talked about that. I gave some recommendations for mock AIMEs here. If you run out of past tests for some reason, you can just look at it on your own. I'm just going to skip the stuff about math specific advice because that's not the purpose of this talk. You can read it later on your own, and it's not really helpful because I'm not here to give math advice today. But you can ask math questions at the end. I just want to get through this document first before taking questions. Where can we find the doc? So I'll link it again after a bit. So don't get intimidated by scary notation. Sometimes the easy looking questions are like hard, and the stuff with a lot of advanced notation is actually not that hard. So yeah, and another thing is, try not to be overconfident. If you think you've been doing great, still be humble. Don't be underconfident either. Like, if you haven't been doing so well in math competitions the last 3 months, don't let that negatively affect you. Don't let the fact that you did really good or really bad last year affect you positively or negatively if you can. I mean, that's hard to do, and it's easy for me to say. And I'm not saying it's possible to do it completely, but try not to be like, too affected by nerves, or like, just be reasonable and just approach the, try to have a good mindset and not do too much math the day or two before, so you can be fresh for the test. The reason I say don't do too much math the night before is like, if you're going to run a 3-hour marathon on Saturday, you probably don't run a separate 3-hour training marathon on Friday, right? The day before. Like, your brain is the same way. You should relax it a bit the night before. Oh yeah, and don't worry about how anyone else does, because that's outside of your control. You can only control what, how well you do. Are you feeling good? Like, maybe eat some food before the AIME, obviously. Those things are in your control, like your mindset, your practice, your not sleeping too late the night before and stuff like that. Those are the only things you control. So even though other people's performance somewhat help determine the cutoffs for JMO or AMO, just don't worry about it. You can't do anything about it, so you should just focus on what you can change, which is like things you can do, like to improve your own mentality and readiness. Okay, I don't know how much longer I can talk since I was pretty tired today. So my general recommendation for a strategy is to be conservative, because that's how I approached it. But you can just ignore this advice. I don't think it's too. I don't think it's like necessarily like, you should just do the best you can do. One thing I'll say is like, the gist of what I'm trying to say here is that, like, if you're gonna be greedy and try to attempt 13 questions or something, that's fine. But it might sometimes be better to attempt like one fewer question and check your other questions more thoroughly, right? Because maybe, that means you don't get the 13th question correct, but maybe, you catch mistakes on 2 others that you might have made a mistake to on the earlier part of the test. So, you should just, I think it's better to not be too risky and not check anything. So, if the try to decrease the variance of the possibility of your scores by like doing everything carefully is what I'm trying to say, even if it costs you time to try a later problem. That's my general advice, which you can feel free to take or ignore based on your own experience. Let's see. Yeah, so the general thing is to know yourself well enough to know what works for you and what doesn't work for you. That means you should have taken some practice AIMEs before the day of the AIME and figured that out beforehand. The day before AIME, do something relaxing, finish your homework, whatever. Don't worry too much about math. You can do some math, that's fine, but like, maybe do something relaxing like running or jogging or jump roping or video games or watching YouTube, or I don't know, just like, try to veg out a bit so that you can be more fresh for the test, because it's important to like rest your brain a bit the day before the test. And I think nowadays, like the AIME, you have to do it at 1:30 to 5:30 EST, whenever that is for you or something. So if you're in CST, Central Time, maybe like don't eat a huge lunch, because maybe then all your blood will go to your stomach instead of your head during the test. But like, definitely bring some, like eat some lunch, but like also bring some snacks. Like don't eat a huge meal beforehand, but also don't eat like nothing 6 hours before the test in like that time period. If you take it in the morning, you should definitely eat breakfast and bring something if you have to skip lunch, because maybe you take it 10:30 to 1:30 and you can't eat lunch at a good time, and you just have to bring snacks during the AIME, which is fine. It's fine to eat some food. I would just bring like 2 granola bars and 2 bottles of water and leave it at that. So what to bring, you can read that. Okay, so I don't have to go through. So this is basically the end, I guess, of my document. So I guess for the next 40 to 50 minutes, do you guys have any questions? If you do, type it in the Zoom chat. Don't say it out loud for the sake of like organization's sake. So I think, let me see, someone had a question earlier. So let's see, around how much time should you spend on a problem before you move on? I mean, that just depends on the question. I would say if you get stuck for 2 to 3 minutes, you should move on to a different question and come back to that later. Yeah, so thanks for posting the link to the document. So yeah, just let me know if you have any other questions that like, last time when I did the AMC strategy session, there were tons of really good questions asked. So feel free to ask any questions you have. There are no stupid questions, and I don't have to read your name out loud if you don't want me to. So questions. In general, my advice is not too important. It's more important that you do some practice and figure out what works best for you. Okay, yeah. And if you have to go, that's fine, but I'm gonna stay for another 10 to 20 minutes in case anyone has any questions, because I think it's good to listen to other people's questions and see if I have anything useful to say about it. So in terms of, let's see. And I'm terrible at guessing what the cutoffs are. So asking me what the cutoffs are probably not going to be too helpful, because I think my guesses are like not that good about what the cutoffs might be for the Olympiad. And if you want me to repeat something I said earlier or clarify something earlier, feel free to. Yeah. Okay. There's a lot of people in the meeting, so you can feel free to ask. There's no don't be shy, but if no one has questions, I may just leave after another 5 minutes or so. And if I put this on YouTube, thanks everyone for watching me talk through my document. But feel free to ask questions, or if you guys want to like do something on your own, that's fine too, or just talk to each other, that's fine. Can we ask specific problems or not enough time for that? I mean, since no one else has questions, you can, but I wasn't really planning on talking about math today, but you can if you want, that's fine. You can just link me a problem if you want, but today's talk will not be too math related because what's 1 + 1? Oh, I don't know. That sounds too hard for an AIME. Okay. What's a good AIME score improvement per year? I mean, that depends. That's a function of how hard you work, right? Like if you can spend 2 hours a day on math, that's 14 hours a week. That's like a lot of time, right? Especially during the school year. If you can only spend 45 minutes a day, the answer would be different. So it just depends how much time you have. Like, if you're still in middle school, maybe you have lots of time. If you're, in 11th grade, maybe you have barely any time. So it's kind of hard to say. But, if you have like 1 hour a day, I mean, I don't really want to answer this question because like the AIME, it could change in difficulty, and the difficulty could be different to various people on like the current year and next year, right? So it just depends on so many factors that there's not really a useful answer or helpful answer I can give. So I find that I get easily discouraged when I get the AIME, and even when I get the AIME and even the majority of questions 1 through 5 seem difficult at first glance. Do you have any advice for that? This is in relation to recent harder AIMEs. I mean, the way I would think about it is, every question you get right is a victory, right? Even if you like find number 1 hard, that's fine, right? As long as you solve it, you solved it. Even if it took you 8 more minutes than it usually takes on number 1, solving it is the same as solving it, regardless if it was easy or if it felt hard or if it looked intimidating at first. So as long as you can still eventually get 1 through 5 all correct, like in like 2018 compared to 2010, it still means you got 1 through 5 right. So I would try not to be like, yeah, every point is a victory on the test. So yeah, I think don't let the initial difficulty be too discouraging if it felt hard. On the other hand, you don't want to be like, if the first 5 all felt easy, don't let it be too like encouraging either, because the rest of the test will still be whatever it is. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say that, but yeah, these kinds of mindset questions, they do affect you, but like, try not to be discouraged by anything. Like even, because I've seen some AIME number 5s that were like pretty hard, or AIME number 6 that were pretty hard, right, for their placement. And if you can't solve those, then fine. Maybe it's like some weird geometry problem or setup that like you're not used to, and you just haven't prepared for it enough by chance. But just like do your best on the rest of the test regardless. Like, you can even just do like, oh, I'm going to do all the number theory questions first, or I'm going to do all the counting questions first. I don't really recommend this, but like, you don't have to take the MAA's problem order selection too seriously, because, and if it feels hard to you, it probably does feel hard to like maybe 60 to 80% of everyone else. So, just the fact that it's hard should not be discouraging. And on the other hand, like if it feels really easy to you, then it might feel easy to other people as well. So just keep that in mind. And most likely, if you've been doing well in practice, you're not too much like smarter or dumber or far ahead or behind anyone else who's like also done a reasonable amount of practice similar to you. So yeah, don't let that worry you too much. Let's see, oftentimes, so here's another question. Oftentimes I lose concentration after I get close to my goal score and then get lazy and work less hard. What should I do? Should I change my mentality? I mean, so there's 2 questions in there, which is like, if you lose concentration, take like a 2 to 3 minute break, like walk to the bathroom, even, just take a walk. If you have to, you can just say, oh, I have to go to the bathroom, even if you don't have to go to the bathroom, and you can just like walk down to the bathroom and come back, and your mind will be like not staring at the test for a minute, and you'll just like, maybe that's a bit helpful. If you're losing concentration, you should take a break, is what I would say. But if that makes you get lazy and work less hard, like if you've gotten close to your goal score, I mean, I don't think you should have like a specific goal for each test. You should just do as best as you can do on each test. Like, if you, let's say you take a really hard mock contest made by someone else, right? Like, maybe they made it so that like the average score of that AIME is fewer than like what you would normally get on an AIME. Like, you shouldn't let that be discouraging because the test was harder, right? At the same time, you shouldn't be encouraged or discouraged by like, I mean, it's good to be encouraged by getting close to your goal, but you shouldn't be lazy just because you've gotten close to like within 1 point of your goal. Because I don't think it's good to have like a specific number as your goal anyways. You should just do as best as you can do. Like, if for some reason you can magically solve all 15 questions, then you should do that. You shouldn't just like do the first 10 and then just like, oh, I still have 45 minutes left. I've checked the first 10 and like, I'm just gonna sleep the other 45 minutes. Like, no, you should just do as best you can do. Like, you only get one chance to take this test a year if you get to take it at all. So, might as well make the most of it. Like, don't just like, sleep for 25 minutes doing the test just because you can or something. I think that's like a poor mindset, and it's not a great mindset for even other things other than math. So if you can change or have a more positive mindset or like growth mindset, try to have a growth mindset even during the day of the test, on the test. How do you not stress waiting for results to come? Well, ideally you would just work hard year round, right? Like, I mean, it didn't bother me because I just like did Olympiad problems and figured that would be like preparing for AIME would be a subset of doing Olympiad problems. But so, after AIME, I would just go back to doing what I used to do, which is like, problems harder than AIME. But, you shouldn't really be, you should just do as best as you can year round in preparing, and, just do your best on the day of the test as well. And then whatever the results are, they just are what they are, right? There's like, if you've done your best, there's no use worrying about it. And there's no point in worrying about it if you've done your best all year. I'm going to ignore the math question. This is going to be Dropbox. Yeah, it will be on Dropbox later. What if you don't have time to practice because you don't have enough time to take the test? I'm not sure what that means, but I'm just going to ignore that since I think this is kind of a not that serious question. Yeah, so if anyone else has any questions, feel free to ask. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen just because I can. There's no point in like not sharing my screen, I guess, because I can scribble while I talk. Yeah, if anyone else has any questions, that's fine. You can just hang out here too until I end the meeting, which, if I get 5 minutes of continuous no questions, I might end the meeting at some point, but feel free to ask if there's any questions. And you can feel free to leave whenever, since I think I talked about most of the things I wanted to talk about anyways. Just maybe I'll go back to my doc. Like, what did I skip? I skipped like math stuff, which is, yeah, you should look elsewhere for math tips on the AIME because that's not the point of today's talk. Like, some things that are good to know are like number theory theorems, like Euler's theorem, Fermat's-Little theorem. For AMC, a lot of number theory problems fall in the category of prime factorization bases, mods, or algebraic forms. Yeah, for algebra, you should know Vietta's formulas and symmetric sums a bit. It's good to know the relationship between complex numbers and trig and the Maury's theorems. Yeah, there's not really much, to be, yeah, I don't want to focus too much on the math for today. But if you have any general questions, it can also be general math learning questions, not specific to the AIME. You can feel free to ask. Since I'm here, might as well ask, but you don't have to. And you can ask in a whisper to me. You don't have to say it in everyone chat if you don't want to. Zoom does allow whispers. So, for the last week, I would say, maybe take one practice AIME this weekend and just, do your best, right? Hopefully you've been preparing year round and, can, show off what all your hard work on the day of the test. I, obviously hope everyone here can, do as well as they can do in practice. Because that would be ideal. Even if the test is hard and you get, one fewer question right than your average, that's still doing as best as you can do because the test was hard. So obviously that's a bit subjective, but it can be objective too. I personally think the AMC 10 cutoffs, like the JMO cutoffs, might be a bit lower this year just because the AMC 10s were like pretty brutal this year. Like, maybe like if you got a 105 on this year's AMC 10, that would be equivalent to like a 114 on last year's or something, because this year's AMC 10s were harder than last year's AMC 10s. And there seemed to be a general consensus about this. So yeah, so you might expect the JMO cutoffs to be a bit lower as a result. Okay, so if no one asks any questions, then I will probably end the meeting in like 2 minutes. And so let me just link, this is for anyone who might have came in super late, this is the, hang on, copy link. Copy link. Yeah, so I will email everyone a recording of this meeting, and you should just or you can just read through this document. Hopefully this is the right document. Yeah, I think I pasted the right link there. Yeah, so I'll put both the PDF version and the open documents version on there. And you don't have to take my advice too seriously, but maybe some of it is useful. Yeah, so I will probably get going in 1 minute. It seems like there's not too many questions today, which is totally fine. Yeah, if you do have questions, you can, I guess, yeah, if I'm feeling nice, I guess you can email me, but it might be better, to just ask a friend who may be more experienced than you, and that would also be very good for, if you have other questions. So I'm just gonna